Good evening, gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, which I think is probably the vast majority, my name is James Orr. I was in Solomon House from 2005 to 2009 as a boy. Thank you. Just with that reaction from the disillusioned members of the crowd, I'd just like to point out that for at least the last 15 years, the master of ceremonies at this function has been a Solomon House old boy. And the association and the directors of the association clearly know where to put their faith on an evening such as this one. I've been teaching at the school. I've had the privilege of teaching at the school since 2016, and I can't escape Solomon House. I've been back there as a master since 2016, and my responsibilities here, I'm in charge of the pipe band, which I know most of you loved while you were here. Just to get the formalities and the running of the evening out of the way, we've had the last few dinners in the hall. So those of you who don't remember the layout of this place, the bathrooms are on the south side of the building. Please will you ensure that all smoking takes place outside. And this year we have there's no cash bar. So please make sure that all of your orders are taken at the bar over there, and you have a drinks menu on the table in front of you. I've been told that an unofficial part of my job this evening is, to keep you in line and make sure things run smoothly. And if I ever think of the most effective form of crowd control I ever witnessed was here. When I was in Form 1, we had a house prefect in Solomon House. So those of you who were in matric in 2005 would have known Josko Selesky. And he was the first team prop. He was a very large man clearly of Polish descent. And whenever he did lights out, shortly before turning off the light and closing the door, he would turn around and stare at us with the angriest look on his face and say, "If any of you boys are talking tonight, I'm cracking skulls." And this left us sweating like gypsies with a mortgage, and we never said an entire word the whole evening. Now, unfortunately, I don't possess Joska's voice. I don't possess Joska's form, so I would like to just call upon your gentlemanly nature that when I call you to your seats, you please respond appropriately. Seated at the main table this evening, on my far left, we have Mr. Wayne Forrester, the current chairman of the governing body. Seated next to him, we have Marius van Staden, who's the chairman of the Praetorian Trust. Next to Marius, we have the former headmaster of the school, Mr. Bill Schroeder. And next to Bill, we have Mr. John Eilsley, the second master at Pretoria Boys High School, who told me at the bar a second ago that this is his 31st year at Pretoria Boys High School. Next to John, we have Jason Weber, who is the recently appointed chairman of the Old Boys Association, who will be addressing us a bit later this evening. Next to Jason, on Jason's right, we have Mr. Tony Reeler, the headmaster of Pretoria Boys High School, which I probably didn't have to say, you all know that. And next to Tony, we have Patrick Conroy, our guest speaker, and I'll be giving him quite a long introduction later on this evening. And next to Patrick, we have Mr. Tony Wilkes, who is the life president of the Old Boys Association. One of only three we've had in the history of our association. And seated next to him is Father Timothy Lowe's, who will be saying grace in a second. And then, the open seat is for me, obviously. Some of my favorite memories of reunion assemblies that I attended as a boy and Old Boys dinners is stories about shenanigans that occurred in classrooms, and some of the very eccentric and famous figures that have taught at this school over the years. Names like Tos du Toy come to mind, and Eddie Dory. And when I was preparing to speak tonight, or be the master of ceremonies, And it's funny that I prepared to open the evening this way because he was mentioned in assembly yesterday by the speaker we had in. Many of you who attended the school in the late 90s and up until about 2010 would remember Mr. Keith Mansfield. And I had the privilege of being taught by Mr. Mansfield in Form 1 and 2 for both French and English. And he taught me again later in Form 4 and Matric for English. But he was probably the best and the most entertaining teacher I've ever had. And there was a lot of humor in his classroom, but a lot of it was very subtle. And he was quite a small man. He still actually, he is a small man, he's still with us, and he comes and he teaches at the school occasionally, so I hope nothing I reveal tonight will ruin his chances in the future, Mr. Reeler. But he had a very famous corner in his classroom, and the name for this corner was Burke's Corner. And this corner was sort of created in 2005 when I was in Form 1. And with its creation came a lesson in Cockney slang. And he explained to us in that lesson that the mechanics of Cockney slang relied on a two-parted phrase that you rhymed with the word you were intending to use. Now, I'm not an English teacher, I'm a biology teacher, so if my explanation doesn't make sense, I have a demonstration. Bees and honey would mean money, but instead of saying bees and honey, you would just say bees. So if a Cockney mugger demanded your bees, you would promptly hand over your wallet. And bricks and mortar was B for daughter, and then one of my favorite one is cows and kisses is from, the missus. And please don't try that at home, gentlemen. I don't promote that behavior. and I think the sentence he used was, as an example, I'll tell you some brass. I was talking on my flowery to my bubble landlord about paying his duke when I drove my jam off the frog, which sounds like complete gibberish, but, if you translated it, it would be, I'll tell you some facts. I was talking on my cell to my Greek landlord about paying his rent when I drove my car off the road. And with the understanding of Cockney slang in mind, he then proceeded to tell us that the Burke for Burke's Corner was the shortened form of Berkshire Hunt. I'm glad to see even the schoolhouse boys caught that one. I was a bit worried. And there were some prominent figures that featured. He would stick their faces up there, people who had made a fool of themselves in the media. Britney Spears was up there. David Beckham was up there. I don't know why. We were all looking up to him at the time. And Simon Cowell was up there. And then during the whole arms deal shenanigans, Jacob Zuma and Shabir Sheikh, they had an honorary spot up there. And if we fast forward to my Form 4 year, and these two stories will make sense a bit later, I returned to his class for English, and Burke's Corner was still alive and well, and he'd updated it. It had been joined by new figures such as Julius Malema. He was then being ousted from the ANC Youth League. And one day he was teaching us about spoonerism. And I'm sure we all know how spoonerism works. Apparently it was named after a famous bishop who had an actual mental disorder, and he would switch words around. So, our head boy, Carl Brown, would be called Brow Crown or something. And during this lesson, there was a boy, probably a schoolhouse boy, who'd been annoying Mr. Mansfield continually. And I remember he took a stick of gum out of his blazer pocket, which we all know is, you just don't do that. And Mr. Mansfield saw him put it into his mouth, and he lost his temper, but he always lost his temper in a very cool way. And cool, I mean calm and collected. And he looked at this boy, and just after explaining to us what spoonerism was, he said, "You, young man, are a cunning stunt." And of course, we all burst out laughing, and the Risic boys joined us about a minute later when they caught the joke. Now, to tie the two tales together, and the reason why I've given you such a long explanation of two, anomalies in the English language, is that the next day when we returned to English, just below Julius Malema's face, I distinctly remember the boy's name, and I've kept him anonymous to save him, written on very neatly on a piece of folio paper and stuck to Burke's Corner, where clearly he belonged. Gentlemen, grace this evening will be said by Father Timothy Lowes. He's a proud old boy of the school, matriculated in 1972. He was in Townhouse. And for a long time, I remember Father Timothy Lowes being the sort of unofficial chaplain of Pretoria Boys High, and being the religious representative at many functions. I'd like to call Father Lowes up. Thank you.